Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have with us always Jodell Onstott. She is the author of this book right here, Yahweh Exists, and one of the great resources of our day. And I am thrilled when I get calls and go around town and see some of my friends that have ordered and bought this book. Now, you're not going to read this in one night. You're going to read it. You're going to read it and stop and reread it and stop. It's just one of the great volumes to have in your library. And let me encourage you to check it out, called Yahweh Exists, and Volume 1. It is incredible. I find myself often in there doing some research myself, and I just can't say enough, Jodell, for your hard work. How long did it take you to do this?
It took 16 years.
Oh, only 16 years.
just 16.
Well, I got to tell you, some folks that I have bumped into that have bought the book find themselves just reading, and then coming back and rereading and rereading. So you're having an impact with your hard work. So thank you so much.
Good. Thank you for sharing that. That makes all that hard work and those sleepless nights worth it. Because you really don't do it for yourself. You do it because you want to share that information and enrich other people's lives.
Yeah, well, it's working. And let me encourage you folks to check it out. We've been dealing with the 10 Commandments. You know, and so quickly we run through the 10 Commandments in our everyday life. We know they're there. We teach them to our kids. We watch. But at the time they were given, they were revolutionary. And so part of the history behind that is, why would something as simple as honor your mother and father be revolutionary? Well, that's what we want to talk about. Now, we have dealt with Commandments 1 through 4. You shall not have any other gods before me. You shall not make idol. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, and remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Well, now we're going to pick up with 5 through 7. But first of all, Jodell, why was it revolutionary when they were given of things that would be so obvious?
One of the reasons is because the idea in the Mosaic Law is that these are universal laws. They apply to everyone within Israel's borders. You didn't have a concept like that in any other ancient Near Eastern civilization. In Mesopotamia, you would have one particular cult. And just a little bit of history here, each temple cult situation had its own set of laws. So everyone's probably familiar with the Hammurabi Code, but those were not universal for all citizens. If you were a slave, you didn't have access to the law the same way that a citizen of the nation would. So you had double standards inside of every nation several thousand years ago.
All right, so let's get into these. Let's start with the one that would seem so obvious. Even in today's culture, it's controversial. Honor your father and your mother.
You know, this is so important because it tells us a lot about where God assigns importance and the relationships he sees as pivotal. He didn't put kings, he didn't put the military, he didn't put the priest in this position of honor. He put parents. This shows us that he places immense importance on the individual family. This means that the individual is very important in God's eyes when we talk about a relationship with God, when we talk about responsibility. It's on the individual level. But even more than the family itself, you know, back in the 1920s, Sigmund Freud discovered that the relationship that a child has with his father will really determine the type of relationship and the way that a person, an individual, relates to God. So by establishing that healthy relationship, God was also establishing his ability to have healthy relationships with his children. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 at the same time. If you have a healthy parental-child relationship, then you're more likely to have a healthy relationship between child and God. But even beyond this, and people often forget the political ramifications of so many of the commandments. And that is, when you have a healthy society and parents are placed in a position of honor and authority, there's no competition with the state. In totalitarian regimes, the very first thing that they do is they seek to remove parental authority. So it's no wonder that Marx in the Communist Manifesto, he writes that the ultimate goal of communism is abolition of the family. So the family is displaced and it is replaced by the communist state. And in a healthy society where you have healthy parent child relationships, they're not going to allow that to happen. They're going to stand up for their rights. They're going to stand up for the sanctity of the family and of marriage, and they're not going to allow those outside threats. So, modernly, this is why we find, especially among many conservative voices, a lot of apprehension for such things as Common Core, because some of the language in some of those materials places the state in an equal footing as parents. And in some cases, it even denigrates the parental role as, not having the honor and the authority that God has given to that position.
Well, we see that for sure. There is a constant wedging between the family and the child, and seemingly the public education is one of the wedges that gets in there. All right, let's back up a little bit. So Moses comes down off the hill and he says, hey, honor your father and your mother. What did the people of Israel think of that?
It could have been something for them that they would have seen as just natural. In ancient societies, you had a very strong family system, usually patriarchal, where the father was held in esteem. So this is establishing not only for a religious connotation, but also for a political situation where the father and that family had authority. The parents had equal grounding. One of the things that when people look at this and they're looking at feminist issues, throughout the Torah, the scriptures always put the woman with equal footing with the husband. And that is something that unfortunately is often overlooked, of the fact that the parents together are placed in a position of very high authority and of very high regard.
If you look at the Big Ten, as I often refer to them, there's two institutions, if I can put it that way, or two groups that are only talked about: God and parents. You don't see priests, you don't see hierarchy, you don't see kings, presidents, potentates. You see God and parents. That's pretty significant.
It really is. And when you look at it, what we know from probably 50, 60 years of studying economics, of studying the family institution, is that when you have healthy families, you have higher education, you have less crime, you have less rates of poverty when you have healthy families. So the whole entire thing about honoring your parents is the protection and the mentoring of another generation, so that they are healthy, so that they can contribute to society and make another healthy generation. You see that the crisis that we face in so many of our social institutions and issues with social justice, so many of those arise because there is a breakdown. There is a direct correlation between the rates of divorce, between the problems that you have with parent and child across these institutions. And as that occurs, when the family begins to break down and when you don't have that healthy bond, guess who the entity is that comes in and steps in to provide that structure? And that, of course, I am referring to the government. But when the government provides that structure, it is something that has consequences that cannot always be reversed. And a lot of times those consequences are very adverse to society as a whole.
No question about it. All right, number 5, honoring your father and your mother. All right, number 6, this is an interesting one because it's very controversial. You shall not murder. And why is that put in there?
Well, again, in ancient societies, there was no universal law against committing murder. In the Torah, you have a prohibition against the practice of kafar, which is known as ransom. And this is a practice that is still done today in modern Sharia law. When a person commits murder, they can pay a ransom, and it's basically their get out of jail card. Whatever they did, whatever murder or atrocities they have done in the past, they simply pay the ransom and they get off scot-free. Well, this was not right in God's eyes. He put the ultimate value on human life, where if you killed someone, then it was life for life. Some people see this as an injustice, but rather this was holding human life in the highest regard. You never just became a number in ancient Israel society where you were killed, the murderer gets off, and you're just another number in the books. This whole idea of life for life kept society accountable. It kept the value of the individual incredibly high within the context of social justice for Israel society. So you had a situation where if a murder occurred, the entire city, the entire community would kind of shut down and just go into what was necessary until that murderer was found and until the situation was rectified. So this was something that when you follow this type of philosophy in your system of social justice, you have fewer rates of injustice because it is such an atrocity within the society.
All right, let me take a break here, Jodell. We'll come back. I want to continue with this because murder rates in America have never been higher. And is there a difference between murder and killing? And maybe you have some thoughts on that. Again, we're talking to our good friend Jodell Onstott. She's the author of this book called Yahweh Exists. Let me encourage you to get a copy of this. It's an incredible resource for you to have in your library. And we'll be right back in just a moment.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Okay, welcome back, and as always, a delight to have with us Jodell Onstott, the author of Yahweh Exists, one of the great resources of our day. This is an incredible, it took her 16 years to put this book together, and I can't say enough about it, and I'm delighted to see people in our listening and viewing area start to buy this book and have it in their library. We're talking about the 10 Commandments, not 10 suggestions, 10 Commandments from God to humanity. And at the time they were revolutionary when they came out, and today they're controversial. So we're taking a look at the Commandments 5, 6, and 7, honor your father and your mother. We're now on number 6, thou shalt not murder. And what's interesting about this commandment, you would think it would be obvious, but it has set up great controversy in our culture today, Jodell, as it relates to the death penalty. Is it an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth? If somebody commits murder, should their life be given for that? What's your take on that?
Well, in the process of searching for moral truths, you have a lot of people that have come to see the idea that all murder in all forms is wrong. It doesn't matter if you have a serial killer who's killed 20, 30 people, and who, if he's let out again, will commit the same crime. It is still viewed as though putting this person to death, issuing the death sentence, goes above the mercy that God would naturally extend to that person. So in other words, there's a dichotomy here where people see the mercy of God overriding justice. What you have in many cases, unfortunately, a lot of your early versions of the Bible misinterpreted and used a word that was not actually accurate. So it is actually a matter of semantics in some regard. In Hebrew, you have two words for killing. You have havag, which is just simply killing of all kind, and you have bitzach, which is the idea of murder. In Exodus 20 and the 10 Commandments, it says, do not commit murder. It doesn't say do not kill. So the idea there is that there are places where it is appropriate to put someone to death. It is never appropriate to murder, which is the idea of taking an innocent life. But if that person has been tried by a jury, if he has been found guilty, then the idea, it says something like over 15 different times in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, you shall put evil from out of the land where you go to possess. So the idea is that if you follow statutes, if you follow judgments, and you follow the system of justice, that when people know they cannot get away with it, there's no loophole, there's nothing they can do to skirt the justice of the law, that they will stop trying to play the games and they will stop making the choices that take another life.
Yeah, and this just goes on, this battle, the death penalty, and especially the mercies of God, the right to life issue comes into this mix. It's pretty complicated, but let's separate murder, which I think we understand what that is, to killing, because in the Old Testament, God gives some pretty good instructions to go out and wipe out a bunch of people. How does that play into this commandment?
Well, specifically with the Canaan conquest, you find that in Genesis 12, God said that in 430 years, he would give the land of Canaan to Abraham's descendants. So he tells them to go in and to cleanse a homeland, to go in, and a lot of times it's horrific, kill man, women, and children. But the idea that he says in Genesis, I believe it's right around 12:15, is that he could not do it in Abraham's days because the sins of the Amorites had not yet come to the full. The idea is that in 430 years, humanity living in Canaan would become degraded. They would have immorality, there would be sexually transmitted diseases, they would have become degenerate enough that another entity could come in and render God's judgment. You know, so many times when we talk about the judgment of God, we're looking for fire falling down from the sky as it did with Sodom and Gomorrah. But that is often not the case. If you look at ancient Israel's history, the judgment that God issued was bringing Nebuchadnezzar to take the people captive, to deport them, to have a war. He refers to Nebuchadnezzar as his servant. So these are ideas that we don't always see in the text unless we're well versed, but understanding them really provides the bridge between the dichotomy of murder and killing, where there is an appropriate time for killing when it is a matter of justice.
Well, we're facing today under the name of a religion, some innocent killing and murdering is going on, and I don't know if the world knows how to respond now. I mean, we just don't know what to do with this. you know.
Yeah, what I see is that throughout Scripture, in Deuteronomy 4, like verses 4 through 8, it states, if you follow the statutes and judgments that I give you this day, you will become a strong and mighty nation. No one will dare attack you. One of the concepts that you find with God offering this type of covenant to Israel is that he was offering them protection. When you look, say, at Sharia and some of the things that are done in the name of a God, you find gross atrocities. You do not find those types of atrocities in the Torah. You find a system of justice, a system where you could not take the law into your own hands, where you were supposed to go to court and you were supposed to have a trial by jury. These are things that Sharia does not embrace, and statutes that they do not follow. You find you have renegade militia that are just out there taking the law into their own hands. There is no trial of their peers, and it is something that has really led to chaos and, in a way, its own form of judgment, unfortunately, for the people affected in those regions. I mean, it's just really horrific.
All right, let's go on to the other one before we run out of time. Commandment number 7, thou shalt not commit adultery. So Moses comes down and he gives this to the children of Israel. Was that a problem?
Well, you find that in ancient societies, men really enjoyed a get-out-of-jail card for a lot of the promiscuity that they could engage in. When you look at ancient Near Eastern law codes, you find that the majority, like 90% of the punishment when it is described, deals only with women, as though women have some sort of innate propensity for adultery that men do not. So men really, as long as they didn't get caught in the act, they got off scot-free. There was really no form of punishment for them. Now, If they got caught in the act of adultery, then there was remedies that the husband could take, and the man was caught in the middle, and he could be castrated. His face could be lacerated. If a woman was caught in the act, very similar to Sharia law, the husband could cut off her nose. He could cut off her ear. She could be publicly flogged. He had all sorts of remedies. Of course, they could both be put to death. But all of these were ancient Near Eastern law codes. There's none of this in Torah. What you find in the Mosaic Law Code is the idea of justice, that if this occurs, it is harmful not only to the man, but also to his family. In fact, when you go to Proverbs 6:32, it says that if you commit adultery, you have harmed your own soul. You seek to destroy yourself. So again, it comes to the integrity of society, protecting that very valuable family institution that God has established. Throughout the Mosaic Law, you find that everything God does is to protect the family, because the family is the vessel through which God establishes a healthy society. And if that is compromised, all of a sudden you have children that can no longer trust their parents. And once children cannot trust their parents, then they don't trust other people in positions of authority. So now fast forward to today, where we have whole entire demographics of society that do not trust authority. And then you likewise have authority that abuses its power. But it all begins, this whole entire cycle begins with the individual family unit. So if you protect that family unit, it's not going to spill over into the greater society at large.
Of all of the things that are listed here, and they're all serious, this one carries with it an unusual sting, even among non-believers. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you find that adultery is painful because it is an act of betrayal. For those that have been harmed by the situation, you find that there's feelings of inadequacy, feelings of, can I ever trust again? So this is something that is an inner turmoil that really rips apart society. In some ways, it could be seen as treason. To commit adultery is an act of treason against the very institution that ensures the welfare of society. So God took this very, very seriously, and he wanted humanity to take it seriously. And that is why you find that there are consequences in the Mosaic Code for both men and women if they are caught in the act.
Well, I can say this: it's one of the commandments that takes a long time to recover from. It's not the unpardonable sin; it can be forgiven. However, it just takes a long time to recover from. There's no quick prayer that fixes this. This takes a long one. Jodell, you're fascinating. How can people get your book?
Well, you can go to Amazon. I am on Amazon, just Yahweh Exits. I also have a website, YahwehExits.com. And then also, if something that may help along the way, on Friday evenings at 8:30 p.m., I do a book club where I have a PowerPoint presentation. We go through the material in the book with a PowerPoint presentation in hope of making it a little bit more easily digestible. Now, I am not having my class this Friday night, but I will be back onto it later on in the month.
Okay, and so that's at YahwehExits.com?
Yes, it is.
Fascinating. Well, thank you for your time. I look forward to finishing this. When we get together again, we'll talk about we shall not steal, do not bear false witness against your neighbor, and thou shalt not covet. Boy, these are fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Perry.
All right, good to see you. All right, we'll be right back.